Hello, hello, hello. It is Thursday and it's time for Let's Talk Power Live. I'm excited to be here with you and let's go ahead and get started. I don't know where you are. Why don't you tell me where you are? If you're watching live, please go ahead and leave me a comment in the chat to let me know where you are tuning in from. What am I thankful for? It's Thursday. I'm always thankful for something. I'm thankful because people find my work useful to them. They have told me, I was with a client about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and we were headed out because I had to go to a different location. And she said to me, you know, every time you come, I get something different and it's useful. And that is what I'm thankful for because the crux of this work is always about supporting leaders and educators, particularly those at the middle school level, with understanding how to make that very unique environment better, more efficient, more productive, and most importantly, the kind of environment students deserve. So that's what I'm thankful for. What are you thankful for? And before we go any further, I'm going to ask you that question I ask every week. Have you taken the time to subscribe, like, and share? I ask that. I'm sure you are watching lots and lots of different podcasts and YouTube channels and YouTube videos and TikTokish and all the things that you're watching. But here's what I want to ask you. Where else are they having conversations about the reality of power in education in real ways? That's the question. And if you are enjoying the learning, the information, the guests we've had, and if you're leading in this moment, this is the kind of information you need, not just for today, but you need every week. So go ahead, hit the subscribe button, like, and share. Well, I ground our conversations every week in this dynamic of power. And I want to go ahead and give that to you again this week. And here is what it is all about. Education is the instrument of democratic designs, and it is no less the instrument of power, the control of information, the shaping of understanding, and the influence of judgment are critical elements common to democratic design, power theory, and educational philosophy. Here's the thing. We know that education is not neutral. It is laden. I'm using my words very carefully here. It is laden with differences or differentials in the way people use their authority. It is not neutral. It determines the systems that we have in education really do determine access, opportunity, and judgment. And we're in a very particular time in our American history, particularly when it comes to, I said particularly twice, but most certainly, we are at this time that is very pivotal in our nation's history. And talking about power in education really is something we need to do and something we need to do in an operational, real way. Who am I? I'm Dr. Tangi. I'm your show host. I'm a national consultant. I've been in education for nearly 30 years at every level except superintendent. I've not been principal, but I've worked at most levels within this profession, this industry that we call education, where I come alongside and I partner with leaders to support their educators and their students so that they get the excellent education they deserve. And so when we talk about power, meaning the capital P overarching decision-making lens, that thing that Beverly Tatum calls the smog in the air of every decision, you go a step further and we talk about what instructional power is. Instructional power is about how you use that authority and the way you stand in your position. And I want to go ahead and give you and share that definition with you as well. And here it is. Instructional power can be understood as an educator's use of their state, district, and building ascribed job-related authority to afford or constrain a student's access to learning. What does that mean? That means that I, as a person in a position of authority over other people's kids, and sometimes they're my own kids, most often not, but it is how I use my authority. It is the lens that shapes my authority that will allow students to have access, or it will constrain that access. So we are knee deep in assessment season. And over the last few weeks, I've been really breaking down this assessment cycle. What is going on in the minds of students? What's happening at the environment level? And last week and this week, want to really dig into some common mistakes that leaders make during this time. And we began that conversation last week, kind of breaking down common mistakes that leaders make during this time of assessment, before assessment, during the assessment cycle, and then next week, a preview. Next week, we're going to be talking about what happens after. But let's have this conversation right now where we talk about what is going on and what happens with the assessments and what they reflect. So first of all, assessments are going to reflect access, right? What students experience before testing shapes what testing can show. We all know you're going to get numbers. You are going to get what's called hard data out of your assessments at the end of the year. The challenging thing is that because it's the end of the year, your assessments are not going to come out until the summertime in most places. But before that comes out, your students have been in an environment, and your assessment results are going to reveal as much about your student knowledge around whatever the content is, but it's going to also reveal something to you about the environment. And it's not all just about the numbers. You're going to get some what we call qualitative data that's going to sort of sit underneath those numbers that are going to help you understand what's going on. The other thing you're going to notice too is that access to rigor has been uneven all year, right? Long before those results come in, the access to rigorous grade level instruction on the material side and on the delivery side. There are two different things. You can have high quality instructional materials, and you should. But if the related delivery is still under grade level, it's the same as not even having a high quality instruction material in front of your students. And the end of the year data is really going to reflect systems and the decisions that you make under pressure. Because when the system is pressured, a lot of things happen. When the system is pressured, you're going to make some very critical decisions, many of which are going to be those that narrow down instruction as opposed to widening it. And before this time of year, even before the test, back in, what's this, April? Can we believe it's April? But before April, back in January, when you came back from break, or it may be right after spring break or your winter break, you've been making instructional decisions. And a lot of times those decisions have been to narrow instruction and narrow down the curriculum as opposed to broadening it. I understand. I have been in this position where I have partnered with leaders and said, hey, do your teachers understand what is going to be assessed? And in those decision conversations we've had to really look at what we call biggest bang for our buck. I've been there, I know. And I've been on the decision side where I've said, you know what, maybe we can give a little bit less attention to one standard versus another standard, particularly if the data is meant to determine what kind of development your students get. But If that is everything that gets done, we have to ask ourselves some bigger questions. Hello there. It's good to have you join us. We really do have to ask ourselves some bigger questions around how much narrowing we're doing. And that's a question we really do have to make sure that we pay attention to. What does it mean to narrow down instruction and narrow down curriculum? And that's something we look at and we say, no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. But we do it. And we do it out of or under the guise of we want to be focused. Focused matters. Of course, we want to be focused. But if you narrow down instruction to the point where students are being undertaught, what you're doing is the very opposite of what you say you want. You're not really making sure your students are prepared. You are creating, or what I would say is you're stepping inside your instructional and leadership power, and you are exploding what we often call the achievement gap, when in fact, what it is the opportunity gap. And research has been very clear around what happens when students are systematically undertaught over the course of time. And we have this data. Here's the one thing that we do know for sure. When we think about outcomes for kids, from our most recent data that came out this year, 2/3 of American students are not proficient in reading and math. 2/3. So if we have 2/3 that are not proficient, only 1/3 is. So either we have a kid issue, or we have an adult issue, or we got some other kind of issue. And when I say adults, I am not just talking about adults in buildings, states, and classrooms. I mean the pervasive adult. But I really want us to lean into what does it mean when we are making leadership decisions that have the potential to do the opposite of what we say we want. And I want to really have us think about what that looks like, right? And the power dynamic here is about the fact that the most needy students often receive the least access to the rigorous, high quality instruction, materials, and support they need. So when we are looking at classroom structures, and we're looking at students who are, they have documented needs for additional support, IEPs, 504s, we sometimes take that signal as the opportunity or permission to underteach them. That is going to create a wider gap between students who receive special education services and those who don't. Our national data definitely bears this out, and data in every school district across the nation bears it out. Students with disabilities or those services are systematically undertaught. That is an instructional power move. And it happens because of our thinking around that population of students and how we treat the development of their documents to ensure that they get the kind of grade level work that they're supposed to get. But then the other thing that we have to deal with here is this underrepresentation, this locking out of students who can do the work of an advanced class with or without additional support, but they're being overlooked for many different reasons. And I touched upon this last week, but this week, this is really a power dynamic. And when our results come out, you're going to be surprised by a student who is going to overperform despite being in what might be considered an on grade level or below grade level class. So I'm going to ask you a question right now. Are the students in your buildings, districts, or states that might be underperforming? Are they underperforming because they cannot do the work? Or are they underperforming because they have not had the systematic, regular access. And someone's instructional power has been keeping them at bay, has been a gatekeeper. And the underrepresentation of whole groups of young people in advanced courses is a system problem. It's not a reflection of the potential of a child. And then when rigor narrows, the power shifts. We understand that adults are in positions of power. That is what this show is all about. And if you are leading in this time, and this is the kind of conversation you're seeing these power dynamics in your buildings with teachers, with students, this is the kind of content that I'm going to invite you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'm taking a timeout to kind of bring that back up. 90% of you who watch this show don't subscribe. You haven't subscribed yet. What that means to us is, you know what? You're enjoying the content, but you might be missing some consistency. So we're going to invite you to go ahead and subscribe, hit the like button, hit the share button, turn on your notifications. And there's another thing I'm going to ask you to do really quickly. We're going to turn 2 this year, and we are trying to get to 200 subscribers by our 2nd birthday, which is in the middle of May. So please help us go ahead and get to our 200 subscriber milestone by sharing this show with 2 people and inviting them to subscribe just like you. All right, back to the content here. When rigor narrows, the power shifts. And there is an academic price that students pay when we narrow down this idea of their curriculum and the delivery. And there are 2 phrases I want you to sit with right now. And here they are: misplaced compassion and unnamed deficit thinking. We know a lot about deficit thinking. We've had these conversations about deficit thinking when wholesale conversations about culture responsiveness began to come out. Deficit thinking was top of mind, and it should be. What we haven't talked about is misplaced compassion as a power move that masks inequity. Misplaced compassion masks inequity. You might think of it as support, and over time, it becomes a hindrance to educators' ability to really support their students. And if you're a teacher watching, your misplaced compassion might look like scaffolding. But if you over scaffold too often, what you're creating is learned dependence. They become dependent on you and they're not able to move forward. It's that learned helplessness. So misplaced compassion is something during this time you might want to be looking for in your buildings and classrooms. What does it look like? It looks like language. Well, that's a sound, not a look. It sounds like educators saying, they just don't know how to do it. These kids can't do it. And if I don't do it for them, they won't be able to do it. Misplaced compassion is also an overuse of the I do, we do, you do framework. If you're stuck on I do, we do, you do too often, sometimes you run out of opportunities for young people to sit with the I do. And sometimes you need to start with the I do and let the kids do it on their own before you jump in. But that is what it sounds like. And what it looks like is an over scaffolding. But the result of that is under teaching. And if you're under teaching, that's going to lead to underperformance when your state tests happen. So what do we need to be thinking about right now? Let's talk this through. We need to be thinking about some common mistakes to avoid during this time of the year. 1, Avoid narrowing the instruction under pressure. It's going to feel like comfort. It's going to feel like, you know what, we need to just go ahead and do the top 3 power standards. But that does not prepare your students for the coming grade. And remember, these assessments are moments in time. I know they carry a lot of weight. I have been there, I know. But still, try your best to avoid narrowing down this instruction. The other common mistake to avoid is lowering expectations in the name of support. That is the misplaced compassion. Then, removing students from rigorous learning opportunities. Again, that becomes, if we narrow down the rigor, we set them up for failure. The one thing we don't want is for students to get their state assessments and be surprised. And if you are in a building and noticing your educators are narrowing the instruction, even when you haven't had the school level conversation, that their expectations are lowering because you have seen it lower, but students are being given watered down, rigorous materials, that's something you want to avoid because they're removing their access to the opportunity. And then reducing the assessment readiness to just low-level practice, as opposed to using assessment readiness and test readiness as an avenue for thinking. We want our students thinking and using this time. If you haven't started your state level assessments and they're coming up, this is the perfect time to engage them in assessment readiness, critical thinking. That is the kind of work that we do alongside our principals and their educators. The question you want to move away from is, are students ready? And you want to move into what conditions have been created to ensure they're ready. Because you're going to get a readout. You're going to know what the conditions were like. And that's what you really want to avoid as you continue to go through this. What I'm showing you now are our power moves. You know, we do power moves every week. And I want to give you these 3 power moves so we can really look at this time of year through a broader lens. Number 1 power move, protect access to rigorous learning, especially now. What does that look like? Keep students in grade level learning. Protect core instruction time. Protect the core instruction. Maintain complex tasks, discussions, writing, and problem solving. Maintain that rigor. Be visible. Be visible, be intentional, and be clear with the message. We are not lowering expectations right now. That's your message. What's the impact of this? Students continue to experience rigorous learning. They preserve their access to opportunity and the accuracy of what assessment results are going to show. That's going to be the impact of protecting rigorous learning right now. Power move number 2. I want you to think through this for a cultural side, right? Protect the learning culture. I thought about this as protecting joy, but sometimes that can feel very trite. So I wanted to go a little bit broader, a little bit deeper. Protect the learning culture. What does this mean? It means maintain your building structures, your routines, and your processes. That's important. The other thing I want you to think about is minimize schedule disruptions. One of the things you might want to consider doing as a leader of a building, or having your educators do it, is send letters home to your parents and saying, this is assessment time of year. We want to make sure your students are as ready as possible. And please try your best to not pick your kids up early. I was in Massachusetts a little bit ago, and I was there all day working with one of my principals that I've been coaching, and it was they have already started their assessments, their MCAS tests, and I got to tell you, I was astounded by the number of students who are being picked up in the middle of the day. The question is this: are students being picked up in the middle of the day because something is emergent and they have to be? Or are they being told to tell their parents to come and get them? I asked that question because in one of the schools, we learned there was a teacher who was telling students to call their parents to come and get them after the assessment. And this is in a building where students are not supposed to have their phones. So we have several layers to unpack, and we can unpack that at some other time. But minimize the schedule disruptions and then communicate more, not less. I want to give you one thing on here that I didn't put. I want you to prepare for celebration. Be intentional. Think through celebration, not just at the end of the test. Maybe a group of students who may have been absent a lot show up for assessments. Celebrate that. Maybe you have a grade that had the highest attendance during one of the testing sessions. Celebrate that. Celebrate everything to protect the learning culture. And then power move number 3. And I conflated the celebration and power move 2, but to bring it back here. Protect your energy. Intentional plans for celebration, which I just talked about. Provide educators with additional support to reduce fatigue. How can you partner with your community to help your teachers reduce fatigue? And then always elevate the positive. What's the impact of this? Students and adults get to recharge, they restore, and they remember the joy of the learning environment. That is the impact of taking the time to really protect energy at this time of year, which can be so difficult to do. So what does that look like? I want you to remember this. Everything we've talked about it's not just about the test. It's about more than the test. It's about more than just the numbers. It's going to reveal a couple of things. It will reveal what we truly prioritize, what we interrupt. Are we going to disrupt those harmful practices, or are we going to lean into them because they feel comfortable? It's going to also reveal to us who have we trusted to think. And then, most importantly, who have we reduced to just being outcomes? Every one of these is a leadership decision that you are making. And that's something that we really want you to consider as we wrap up our time tonight about the mistakes that leaders make this time of year. It's easy. It doesn't make you a bad leader. It makes you human. But that is why being here every week, subscribing to this to this content, right? It's about the content, not so much just the channel. This really is about the content. And next week, we are going to move into what happens after the assessment, because we have to begin preparing for after the assessment right now. It's going to happen sooner rather than later. And I wanted to tell you something about this idea of power that I didn't say at the top of the show. I don't know if you know this. We right now have experienced the largest removal of books from shelves since the McCarthy era in the 1950s. Don't tell me power is not real. It is real when we have more books off shelves than we had 70 plus years ago. Again, Thank you for joining. If this is what you're leading through this time of year, considering the power dynamics in your building, in your classrooms, and this content is resonating with you, go ahead, hit the subscribe button. Get us to our 200 subscribers by our second anniversary. And we will see you next week when we begin to unpack how to be better prepared for life after assessments. All right, everybody, have a great evening, and thank you for being part of Let's Talk Power Live.